Okay, members, good afternoon. We have two apologies, William Irwin and Philip Logan. Philip is on a study trip along with Cathy, the clerk, and therefore clerking today. We welcome back Peter Hall. First time in a long time, and I think for one day only.
One day only.
Okay, Peter, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair.
We welcome visitors to the public gallery. Can I remind them that they can only use mobile devices through a Wi-Fi connection, and devices should be muted, and the passwords are on the sheets on some of those public gallery chairs. Members, we had a meeting yesterday with a delegation from the Kenyan Senate. Sean Cahill, William Irwin and I were in attendance. It was slightly truncated in that their agenda was running when we began, and I certainly had to get into the chamber for question time. I think Sean was in the chamber. They were simply, I think, just interested in our story. They are in a transitional period, and I think their biggest area of concern was the division between the sort of national government and the regional government. So we had a discussion around that. Is there anything John or Cahill wants to add?
As you said, Chair, I came in late and Cahill was there throughout.
No, Chair, it was very good. I mean, you've outlined clearly us what they were here for, and I think we had a good discussion, open and frank discussion with them, but good. I thought it was a good exercise, you know.
I particularly enjoyed the man who was from the opposition party who
was
looking forward to taking over at the next elections.
You and him was got to be big mates, Chair.
Members, and then over lunchtime I met, along with Karen, a small delegation from the Rosetta Trust, which is one of the trusts looking after survivors of institutional abuse. And I think the points I'd like to report back are they are keen to stress that they are part of the panel of redress that we heard from last week, but were simply unable to join last week's session. So they do agree with this kind of two-phased approach in terms of redress, where there would be the common experience payment for all. Where they perhaps differ a little bit is that they're concerned that after the individual assessment that there would be a second large lump sum payment. And I think that relates to a concern about the capacity of the individuals and the likelihood, in their view, that a number of those vulnerable people would not really be able to handle large sums of money. So they are arguing more in favour of an enhanced pension and monthly payments for the second phase. The other issue they asked us to support as a committee was a continuation of a small grant scheme which they avail of. It's up to £8,000 per annum and may run out at the end of this financial year. From what they said, I believe that the other two, the Northwest and Savia, are also in receipt of these small grant support schemes. I have to say I'm unaware of it.
Where does it come from?
Well, they say it originated with OFM-DFM, but now the Executive Office.
Right, and seek clarification.
I would be very keen we write to seek clarification, because if it is coming from them, I say it's the first I have ever heard of it.
Okay.
Aaron hadn't heard of it either.
Mr. Chairman, could I apologise? I had that in my diary, that meeting with the Rosetta Trust, but unfortunately I was speaking to politics students at Methody, and that kept me longer, but I'd hoped to get to that meeting, so thank you for reporting back.
Well, I think they were pleased just that their voice was heard, and those are the points that I agreed to report back with them. Members, I was due to go to Cardiff at the end of the month for the latest meeting of the EC UK. That's the body that was the Commons, the Lords and the devolved administrations who take a view on European affairs. That's been postponed. But lunch with the House of Lords EU Committee here in Parliament Buildings is still on for Monday the 17th. The committee will be in Parliament Buildings holding a series of meetings as part of its inquiry into Irish-UK relations following the EU referendum. Now, the clerk of that committee, even though it's an informal lunch, has asked whether it would be possible to take notes of what is discussed during the lunch. Members, I have to say, I think it's unusual. It could be quite challenging in terms of one person being able to accurately reflect what's being said if there are a lot of people at the table. And they are also seeking to meet the various parties on a party political basis. So for that variety of reasons, I'm not inclined to think it's going to work, and suggest we request that the lunch remains entirely informal.
I think that's right, Chair. I think if they're meeting the individual parties, they'll get a sense of where the parties are, and that would avoid the committee getting embroiled in sort of party politics.
Yep. I think we're all content to keep it informal. Thank you. Members, in your packet, page 5, there is a note from InvestNI, and it's with regard to the first state visit from Colombia to the United Kingdom, and there's an opportunity to have lunch with a VIP from Colombia. Further information on that will be provided when available, but that is something members may wish to note. The invitation at page 6 in the meeting packs from the Children's Law Centre to a briefing event on the rights of children takes place on Wednesday, November the 16th. And they'll be looking at the concluding observations and recommendations to the UK and Northern Ireland governments of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. That was reported on in July 2016. Could I ask members to respond directly to the organisers if they wish to attend? But I'll also take this opportunity to remind members that we have a briefing session on a range of UN observations on our forward work programme. The list of current invitations, members, is at page 7, and in the absence of comment, I'll take you to the draft minutes, which begin at page 9 of your meeting pack, and I ask if members are content to agree the draft minutes of the meeting of the 28th of September.
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising then. There's a letter that we sent to the Chair of the Committee for Communities, page 15, advising him of the actions this committee has taken in response to his correspondence regarding the imbalance of representation on public bodies. And if you remember, we agreed to forward the paper to the Department for comment and to seek a briefing from the Commissioner for Public Appointments on receipt of the Department's response. The list of outstanding committee correspondence begins at page 17 of your packs. That lists responses from the Department which remain outstanding or for which further information is still required. Are we content to note the outstanding correspondence table, members?
Great.
So, during the strategic planning meeting, the committee discussed a number of matters relating to Brexit, and we agreed to ask Assembly Research to have a look at non-EU binding treaty obligations which will pertain in a post-Brexit era, and whether any sanctions would exist for non-compliance with same. So the research paper is at page 21 of your meeting packs, and it provides an overview of non-EU UK treaty obligations. It's an overview because there are so many. Michael was not up for listing every single one of them. So we welcome Michael Potter to the committee. Michael, would you give us your overarching thoughts, please?
Thank you, Chair. As you mentioned, I was asked to look at the binding international treaties that constitute obligations for the UK that will still be in place following the withdrawal of the UK from the EU. So firstly, just to give an idea of the complexity of the treaty landscape. According to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office database, there are over 14,000 international treaties that the UK is committed to. While many of these may be associated with the EU, the majority are not. There are added complications that during the 43 years of EU membership, treaties may have been concluded in the context of the EU, but in fact the UK may wish to continue with some of those commitments. There's no indication of the extent to which the UK would want to withdraw from certain EU-related commitments, depending on the deal struck following the post-Article 50 negotiations. So this paper can only give a flavour of what else is out there beyond the EU. The list of treaties in the appendix is likewise illustrative and not exhaustive. The paper is structured by treaty body rather than subject area. The reason for this is to illustrate that there are international organisations beyond the EU, membership of which carry responsibilities and obligations. As members will be aware, one of the recurring misconceptions during the EU referendum debate has been a confusion between the EU and the Council of Europe, which of course are quite separate bodies, and commitments under the Council of Europe conventions will remain in place after withdrawal from the EU. These commitments include the European Convention on Human Rights, the substantive clauses of which were brought into UK law through the Human Rights Act, and various conventions such as against torture and against human trafficking. And there's the European Social Charter and the Charter on Regional and Minority Languages, to name but a few. Some of those are detailed in the paper itself. In the United Nations, treaty obligations exist on two levels, those directly under the UN and those concluded under UN-associated organisations. I'll not go into the UN human rights instruments here, as this will be the subject of a separate paper later this month. But there's a summary in this paper as a foretaste for members. Treaties under UN organs include employment-related obligations under the International Labour Organization, standards for shipping under the International Maritime Organization, protections of natural and cultural heritage under UNESCO, standards for transport and infrastructure under the UN Economic Commission for Europe, environmental protections under the UN Environment Programme. So again, just an example of a few. So a few examples of treaty obligations outside of the Council of Europe and the UN are also given in the paper. These include trading principles required by the World Trade Organization, energy cooperation under the Energy Charter Treaty, protection of the North East Atlantic from pollution under OSPAR, and the protection of wetlands under the Ramsar Convention, and there are 18 designated Ramsar sites within Northern Ireland that have protection under that convention. I've also included the NASCO Convention for the preservation of salmon stocks in the North Atlantic. Though not a direct signatory, the UK has commitments as part of the EU, but this is an example of where the UK may wish to become a signatory in its own right, following withdrawal from the EU. So it's a very complex picture of treaties. I've added lists of the most recent treaties on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office database in the paper, just to give an idea of the scope and variety of such obligations that have been made recently. Just a final note on how binding international treaties are. This has been a matter of academic and legal debate, and I can't give a definitive answer here. As you know, the Research Service can't touch on legal advice. But in broad terms, there are two approaches to international treaties. There's the monist approach, where international conventions become law in the country that ratifies that convention. And there's the dualist approach, where treaty obligations are reflected in laws passed by the relevant parliament. The UK takes the dualist approach. So while there may be an expectation that there will be legislation that reflects treaty obligations, there's a question as to how directly justiciable the treaty texts themselves are in UK courts. That said, the International Court of Justice is the court that deals with disputes over international treaty commitments, considering points of international law. As members will appreciate, this is a very broad area, but I'm aware that some other committees have been taking an interest in international commitments within their own subject areas, and in particular the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee has been looking at a number of international conventions. So it's with some hesitation that I ask, are there any questions?
Michael, thank you. So 14,000 treaties, over half of them non-EU, so over 7,000 non-EU.
I haven't made a close enough study of the exact number balance between EU and non-EU. Yeah.
Is it, I mean, is it safe to assume that if we don't understand every single one of them, we cannot with utter certainty negotiate with Her Majesty's government, who will then negotiate on our behalf with the European Union and others? Is my assumption. You said that there was confusion during the referendum between the EU and the Council of Europe. Is that quantified in any survey material?
No, it's just that there would have been a number of public statements
Yes.
that would have confused the two. Particularly, I've heard in media outlets that, for example, the European Convention on Human Rights would be done away with once we leave the EU. Of course, that wouldn't be the case. But also conventions. There are some 221 conventions through the Council of Europe. We're not signatory to all of them, but.
I think certainly anecdotally during the canvass for the Assembly election, I'm sure we all came across some degree of confusion. Stuart?
Chair, just first of all, to declare an interest, I represent the Northern Ireland Assembly in the Council of Europe, in the Chamber of Local and Regional Authorities.
Oh, would you like to take your...
We should abolish it.
having declared that,
You're giving us reasons.
I would wholeheartedly agree that there's an incredible degree of confusion between the Council of Europe and the European Union, member states and otherwise, and indeed the responsibilities under the European Human Rights Act and the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, which actually sits next door to the Council of Europe building. And it is even more confusing because the Council of Europe building was previously also occupied by the European Parliament, but they now have their own building in Strasbourg as well. Having made that declaration of interest, may I ask just two very brief questions? First of all, you made reference to the binding nature of non-EU treaties between the United Kingdom and the signatory parties. And you've said how difficult it is perhaps to understand that nature, but some will have been determined in terms of court cases and other judicial processes. So would that at least give us some direction in terms of some that have had judicial decisions on them, and therefore we could reasonably expect in the future, if we remain as signatories to those treaties, that we would continue to be obligated to them? And the second question is, have you been able to identify any particular treaties that are peculiar to Northern Ireland, perhaps in its relationship with the Republic of Ireland or elsewhere?
Okay. The first question, I fear I'll be straying into legal advice on that one. Certainly, I've read court cases where international treaties have been cited as part of consideration, but I couldn't say exactly from a legal perspective as to whether you could take a case based on an international convention, other than obviously through the Human Rights Act. The second question, there's an example in the paper of a recent treaty where the UK was involved in an EU convention on driving disqualification, and the UK subsequently left that convention, but then concluded an individual treaty with the Republic of Ireland on driving disqualification. So that's a very recent treaty. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I didn't come across any specific UK, Northern Ireland related ones. Other than there are properties in the in Northern Ireland, for example, under the Ramsar Convention that are protected. Yep.
And just very briefly, to carry on that point of the driving offences issue, one could assume if there were a broad range of EU regulations or arrangements that were withdrawn from in the future, that they would be perhaps, like the driving one, considered to continue to be necessary between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, at least all given our border, given our proximity, the number of people that travel backwards and forwards, will it be employment law, whether it will be driving, other criminal offences and things like that. So is it likely that we will have to reinvent all of those?
I think the Prime Minister yesterday stated that all EU commitments will remain in place until they get a chance to look at each of them in turn. So I imagine each one will be considered in its own right.
Thank you.
Okay. Danny?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks very much indeed for the presentation. Just in the course of your research, were you able to identify whether non-EU countries such as Switzerland have any of these treaties or agreement with the EU. You know, as a non-member, say the European Convention on Extradition, anything, you know, just is it the case that already countries who are not EU member states have these agreements in place?
I didn't come across any specifically around there, but I wasn't particularly looking for other countries' commitments to the EU. Certainly, the EU is signatory to conventions that non-EU countries are also signatory to. The NASCO one being a case in point. But in terms of individual treaties with the EU, I didn't really.
Okay. Might be interesting to get a sample of somewhere like that.
Yeah, I think this bit of research inevitably should lead to another bit of research.
Yes.
And I'm going to assume, Michael, that to ask Assembly Research to go through the 14,000 is beyond your capacity, and will produce your finest impression of Usain Bolt. Philip.
My question I'm going to ask you, but it may need to ask for those coming in afterwards, just in relation to a very important agreement, treaty, the Good Friday Agreement. In particular, I'm thinking about obligations in Strand 2 and Strand 3 with regard to obligations on relationships on this island and between these islands and Europe. So is there any, was your research didn't touch on that, or could you give us just a wee bit of an explanation of kind of the significance of that and the implications of that?
Mm-hmm. That wasn't covered in the research, but I think you're absolutely right. The people coming after me will probably be able to answer that one much better than I would.
Would that be one more for legal advice than research?
I'm sure they could be approached on that matter. Yep.
Christopher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in terms of the issue of no Northern Ireland specific treaty obligations, that presumably arises from the fact that the United Kingdom as a whole signs up to treaties on behalf of Northern Ireland.
Yes, yeah, that'll be the case. Yeah.
It's an important principle to put on the record. In terms of obligations that we presently have signed up to, I mean, there's talk of a great repeal bill with regard to some of these obligations. Is there an example elsewhere of, I suppose, what was effectively foreign law becoming domestic law? And the only example I could think of off the top of my head was when India became independent from Britain, they simply incorporate British law as the basis of Indian law. So they effectively just translated it into their own legal code and adopted it. So, for example, some of the stuff around some of the treaty obligations that we have, or even some of the regulations that have come from Europe regarding, say, protection of the environment and stuff like that, there's absolutely nothing to prevent the government from simply, even though we leave the European Union, adopting them in a, might there be a great repeal bill, there might be another sort of a great additions bill, adding it all into the body of British law.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that all EU commitments as they stand at the moment will remain in place until they can tackle them individually. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's a process that will take many
It's a mammoth task, yes.
many years.
As I understand, the Great Repeal Law will make all European law British law.
Effectively.
And then there will be a decision made law by law whether to keep it, scrap it, amend it, yeah?
Sorry, Chair.
That'll be the whole.
Okay, thanks, Sharon. Michael, I don't envy your task and that and there, but you've done a great job. But I mean, the whole point, and some of this should be raised because it's hard to separate it out in terms of we're talking about these, agreements and what Europe has actually transposed already. Because let's be realistic. Each member state has been given a derogation anyway to roll out whatever regulation it is. So. But the chair there has maybe clarified some of the stuff in relation to how that's all going to be transposed over. And I use this wee simple example, because people may not get this, but like even the dimensions of a child car seat is under European directive, you know what I mean? And small things like that would be easy adaptable. I mean, but I just want to put this because I think you've clearly answered it. I'm sure you mentioned we may need to look at the legal side of this here, because I could imagine that we're going down the route of a number of legal challenges right across the board, anywhere from a simple thing like child seat dimensions, car seat dimensions, right across the board in terms of any challenges in relation, because we have built up trade and trade practices, and firms and companies are doing different things under European regulation, and I mean that's where the real negotiation is going to be, and that's where it's going to impact on a smaller economy over here than us. Is that a fair assumption? Or have you learned anything in terms of the dealings and how other countries have got around that in terms of some of the agreements that they've made?
No, I haven't really. I mean, clearly, apart from Greenland, nobody's really left the EU before, so the notion of what will be left afterwards. But again, I think the intention is to keep everything in place until it can be looked at individually. As for legal challenges to that, I couldn't really comment.
In terms of a way forward then, members, or a secondary piece of research, I'm just trying to think of the kind of various groups who are impacted by Brexit. You've got the farmers, you've got the universities, you've got the voluntary community sector. You've also got the fishing fleets. Now, when I went out to Brussels a few weeks ago, one official said, well, remember, sustainable fishing is a UN commitment. It's not just a European Union commitment. And I would fear that the fleets down in Portavogie and Kilkeel and Arglass are thinking the day after Brexit they can go out and fill their nets. And that may not be the case. It may not just be the total allowable catch from the EU. Would that be an area that we might ask Michael to look at? And if so, is it doable within the resources you have, Michael?
Well, I think some of the subject committees are looking more closely at some of these things in more detail.
Should it not be a DERA?
So you think DERA might be looking at that, or the DERA committee?
Well, I wouldn't like to speak on their behalf, but I believe that some are looking at that. In the appendices, I've tried to group some of the conventions in subject areas. So it just gives you a flavour of what kinds of conventions are under each subject area. So from page 37 on your packs, Appendix 1 is the Council of Europe treaties. And then there's the UN ones from page 43 on your packs. And this were the UN ones there cover all the laws of the sea, for example. So...
Danny, what were you thinking? Switzerland?
Well, I think I'd like to see if there were any examples of similar type agreements that are in place with a non-EU state. I think Switzerland's probably one of the best examples, located in the very heart of Europe and not in the EU. And to see a range of examples perhaps on whether or not they've had to negotiate different agreements as opposed to simply cutting and pasting what EU states have agreed, within themselves.
Switzerland, Norway. Turkey? Not enough? Maybe 2 countries is enough. And members, would you be content that we distribute Michael's paper to the other statutories?
Yeah.
Perhaps with a cover note to suggest, we take the view that inevitably there will be some non-EU obligation which will impact.
Particularly, Chair, it'd be useful to encourage other committees to share research requests that they have undertaken rather than
Yeah, so we'd be the coordinator.
communication. Yeah.
Yeah, so that we can publish a kind of overview of committee work of all statutories.
But at least everybody would have the same information available to them. That might be beneficial.
Yeah. All content with the approach? Okay, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Most interesting paper. And we stay on the withdrawal from the EU members. You'll recall we did decide we'd invite the head of the civil service. He was due on the 21st of September, but he was unable to attend because of a meeting with the heads of the services of the other devolved administrations. We scheduled for today, I'm afraid, Sir Malcolm McKibben, again, not in a position to attend today. But we have the Permanent Secretary from the Department of Finance and other senior officials with us. Clark's brief begins at page 54. Assembly Research are providing a referendum update at page 56. In the paper from the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building, after the EU referendum establishing the best outcome for Northern Ireland, starts at page 99. And finally, correspondence between the Chair of the Committee for the Economy and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister is at page 147. So we welcome David Sterling, Permanent Secretary at the Department of Finance, Eric Baker, who's Deputy Secretary of the Strategic Policy Group of the Department for the Economy, and Paul Brush, who's Head of EU Future Relations in the Executive Office. David, if you don't mind, just before you begin, Paul, this is a new department under this mandate.
Yes, a new division.
Okay, fine. And David, no papers provided for the committee?
No. Sorry, I didn't. Were papers asked for, Chair?
We tend to expect papers, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that, sorry.
Okay, over to you.
Okay, well, look, thanks very much for the invitation to come along and outline the work being done by the Northern Ireland departments to prepare for the sort of UK negotiations on leaving the EU. And again, just as you've noted, Sir Malcolm McKibben can't be here today. He's at a meeting in London, actually a trilateral meeting between officials from Dublin, London and Belfast on just EU exit issues. I'm here in my capacity as one of the co-chairs of an interdepartmental coordinating group which was set up at the behest of the Executive to coordinate a response to the EU exit. This was a request that went to Malcolm after an executive meeting back in July. Now, Andrew McCormick, who's the Permanent Secretary in the Department for Economy, is my co-chair. He can't be here today, but Derek is here in his place. But we together have been working with all departments to pull together analysis of the potential impact of the exit from the EU and to provide advice to ministers on how they might respond to these challenges. Each department has put in place a Brexit team to coordinate the work within the 9 departments. That's the main structure, and we've been doing quite a lot of work through that arrangement. Significant engagement has also taken place between officials, executive officials and Whitehall officials, and also with our counterparts in Dublin and indeed in Edinburgh and Cardiff. And I can give you more details about those discussions and the arrangements for them. Obviously, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty as to what Brexit is going to mean. But we are seeking, as I say, we're seeking to assess both the opportunities that are going to arise and obviously the risks that need to be addressed as well. The First and Deputy First Minister have made it very clear that they intend to have a full and active voice in shaping the terms of the UK's negotiations and the arrangements for exit. And at a ministerial level, it seems likely that the discussions between the UK Government and the devolved administrations will be through the Joint Ministerial Council machinery. And at the top of that apex, you have what is called JMCP, which is the Joint Ministerial Council Plenary Committee, and it is due to meet on the 24th of October. And our expectation is the First Minister and Deputy First Minister will represent the Executive at those negotiations. There's to be a lower level group, JMCEN, European Negotiations, which will probably meet to get through some of the more detailed discussions at a later stage. At official level, as I say, we are engaged on a bilateral basis at each, at departmental level. So DERA, for example, would be talking to DEFRA. Derek's department would be talking to the EIS. We are obviously talking to the Treasury ourselves. A Whitehall Permanent Secretaries Group has been set up, at which, again, the permanent secretaries from the 3 devolved administrations have an opportunity to discuss issues with Ollie Robbins, who is the permanent secretary in charge of DXU, the Department for Exiting the EU. We've also been feeding the Northern Ireland perspective into a range of detailed sectoral reports which are being prepared by DEXU. And we are also taking part in regular discussions with the Cabinet Office, who are looking at various thematic issues as well. They have set up a couple of specific groups to look at market access and justice and security issues. And a border issues working group has also been established at official level. So I think it's important to point out that we're not relying on any one means of engagement. We are using all channels available to us to find out what's going on and also to maximise our influence. It's quite clear, I think there's no surprise about this, but the issues facing Northern Ireland are perhaps unique and perhaps more significant than for any other of the UK regions. And that is giving a special focus to the work that we're doing. The particular concerns for the Executive were set out in the First Minister and Deputy First Minister's letter to the Prime Minister of the 10th of August, which I'm sure you'll be aware of, and it identified 5 categories of issues. Issues around the border, issues around economic competitiveness, issues around energy supply and security of supply, issues in and around future provision of EU funding, and then sectoral specific issues, particularly in and around the agri-food sector, which obviously comprises a much larger proportion of our economy than in other regions. So that's a sort of broad overview of where we are at the moment. We'll obviously be continuing with further discussions with Whitehall departments. At the weekend, the Prime Minister has signalled an intention to trigger Article 50 before the end of March 2017. So our expectation is that activity will increase over the next few months, both at ministerial and official level. And our role really as officials is to provide executive ministers with the best possible advice on implications and also the best possible advice on potential negotiating positions for the executive.
Okay, thank you, David. That's comprehensive. Can I begin with contingency planning? I mean, clearly as civil servants faced with such a massive event as an in-out referendum, it would be reasonable to expect that there was some sort of contingency planning, even if you felt that the seismic result was unlikely. And it appears Sir Malcolm McKibben did commission some contingency planning in terms of this famous paper that we are told was not finished. Why was the paper not finished?
I can't. The First Minister gave a clear sort of answer to a question about that paper in the Assembly. I think it was yesterday. I don't think I have anything that I can add usefully to that.
Right. Well, she said Sir Malcolm commissioned it, she said neither she nor her predecessor had seen it. It appears her partner in government, the Deputy First Minister, had seen it, but she also said it hadn't been finished, and there was no opportunity to ask why not.
Well, as I say, I'm not sure I can add anything more to that, but I think the important thing to recognise is that following the referendum result on the 23rd of June, the civil service has been mobilised very quickly. I wouldn't say that we were any less prepared than Whitehall has been. We have moved very quickly to establish the apparatus that I've described across all departments. There has been intense analysis completed over the summer. I think we're now in a position where we are aware of all the potential implications. We are in a position where we're able to give advice to ministers on all the major issues that have been identified. And I think we will be able to give ministers advice when it comes to the more detailed negotiations that will begin, I would think, within the next few weeks. So, we have caught up. I think it's also worth noting that we have been working with Deloitte, who have assisted us in conducting pro bono, I should say, an assessment of capability and capacity requirements within the civil service. So we now have an assessment of what the likely need for resources is going to be over the next few years, and we will have to manage within that.
So these departmental Brexit teams currently are populated internally?
Yes, they're populated internally. I wouldn't want to generalise too much about what the departments are doing, because different departments are affected in different ways, and their response has been constructed in line with the context that they face. So, for example, this is characterising things a little crudely, but 3 departments, I think, are affected perhaps more than others, and they would be justice, economy, and agriculture, environment, and rural affairs, with ourselves as well, also from a financial perspective and an EU funding perspective being affected. So I know that at least 2 of those departments have set up special arrangements for consulting stakeholders. And as I say, there have been different approaches taken to conducting analysis, seeking the views of stakeholders across departments. And again, that's being done within the context of what each department is facing.
So it'd be fair to say that within the departments there's a clear understanding and willingness to reach out where capacity needs to be built up by engaging the right stakeholders and experts.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And we've been encouraged very strongly to use whatever means we can to engage, as I say, with other parts of the UK administration, to talk to our counterparts in Dublin and in the devolved administrations.
What about contact with Secretary of State Brokenshire?
Yes, and I should have said, obviously, there are very clear and regular discussions with the Secretary of State at ministerial level, and obviously with NIO officials at official level as well. And they have helped facilitate engagement in Whitehall for us as well, so NIO has been helpful in this.
In terms of ministerial responsibility, this is being driven by FM and DFM?
Indeed.
We know that on occasions when they take differing views, it puts you in a position where all you can say to us is it's under ministerial review, or there's no ministerial agreement, such as the development of Maze Long Kesh. With the terms of Brexit, we have ministers with differing views. So how are you doing for political direction?
Well, I don't think it's any great secret that the 2 parties have approached the referendum from different directions. But equally, it's quite clear that whatever political differences of opinion there have been, both the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister have said that they will work together to find an outcome that is in the best interests of our people here. And we are working as officials across all departments under that very clear instruction. The intention is to find the best possible way forward.
And indeed, they came together to write the letter you mentioned, which has the 5 areas of concern.
Yes.
And valid areas of concern, I think every member would agree. But what about identifying the opportunities?
Well, again, we are all working to identify opportunities as well. I think I said in my introductory bit that there are opportunities and there are threats, and we have to obviously deal with the risks, but we also have to exploit the opportunities. And you know, there are opportunities in this, and as I say, they are different in each area, but there's a very clear intention in all departments that we have to make the best of this, and there is good that could flow from this and will flow from this.
Have you made an assessment of the Prime Minister's speech on Sunday?
Sorry, in what sense?
In terms of, some commentators would have seen it as a very much a sort of hard Brexit type speech with, you know, we will have sovereignty over immigration, one of the 4 freedoms, and, you know, the Visegrad 4 have made clear that they will veto any attempt to block freedom of movement. Well, suggest we're on some sort of collision course over access to the single market and perhaps even the customs union we would be taking an exit from.
We will provide analysis to ministers which will take account of whatever scenario might emerge. Quite clearly, we're operating at a time when the EU on the one hand and the UK on the other are in a pre-negotiation phase. Both will be careful not to reveal their negotiating position. You wouldn't expect them to. Both will probably be adopting a fairly hard public opening position. It'll only be when we get down into negotiations that we find where the areas of common ground, where the areas of difficulty are. And the Prime Minister herself has said she will not be providing a running commentary on the negotiation tactics, etc. So I think that's just the context that we will have to work in. And, you know, again, one of the issues that we will be working hard on is to make sure that we have a say at the negotiating table. First Minister and Deputy First Minister have both said that they need to be there when key decisions are taken, particularly those that are going to affect Northern Ireland the most. And we, at official level, are working hard to make sure that our voice is heard in the various departments that are playing a part in this.
But what I'm coming to, David, I suppose, is are you going to be in a position, and is it an objective of yours, to be able to provide live commentary internally to FM and DFM? And
yes.
To say, you know, things have taken a turn for the worse or things have taken a turn for the better, but we've still got a long way to go. But it's almost like monitoring a patient. You've got a live eye on what's happening.
We certainly, our intention would be to provide the level of support that ministers feel they need when it comes down to the negotiating position. Yep.
Cam.
Thanks, Chair, and you're very welcome. Thank you very much for your presentation. And David, for some of us who grew up and remember what it was like for customs posts, I mean, you know, I'll give you an example. On Monday morning, I got a phone call, a voicemail on the phone to say that a number of migrant workers stopped at the border and they were held for a while because they hadn't the papers, even though they were travelling back and forward, working in farms, north and south. So, I mean, it's not a good sign if that's really the case. But I want to ask the context, because you said you had been talking to the Irish government, and I want to try and get to expand on those negotiations, because come from border area, what I hear is the business community out there now is unsure. They're just continuing on at this moment in time. But at some point they've been asking us, what's the impact of all this? So I'd like to maybe expand on what the impact in terms of cross-border travel and trade and negotiations with the Irish government. And bear in mind, I appreciate what you said when you started off with Brexit. What is it? And you don't know really what it is, but I mean, I'd just like to know what negotiations are ongoing.
Okay, well, look, I think it make clear that as officials, we're not negotiating, we're in discussions. And the discussions we are having with Irish government officials are within the context agreed by First Minister, Deputy First Minister in the Taoiseach at the NSMC back in, I think it was July. And at NSMC it was agreed that there would be an audit of those issues, those border-related issues which are of interest to both governments, and that audit, there would be a sort of presentation of those issues at the next NSMC meeting, which is due to take place in November. So our discussions with officials in Dublin are in and around those type of issues, and they are in and around issues such as free movement of people, free movement of goods, the type of things that you've mentioned there. And at the moment, as I say, it's not as if we're negotiating, we're simply trying to identify...
negotiation, the terminology, discussion,
Yeah.
that topic, but I understand where I'm coming from, because I mean, we had a presentation a couple of weeks ago in terms of tariffs and trade and everything else, and I mean, that's where we're at with it. I mean, it's just when you're living on the border, you experience it, because depending on the currency, on the rate of currency, there's going to be major issues for us, be it travel north or south.
Yep.
And I'm using the example of, unfortunately, those people were stopped the other day, and I mean, it could be just a one-off, but it could be in times we don't want to go back to that. I mean, we want to answer the question in terms of the free movement, you know, which is a key issue for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, again, I think the First Minister and Deputy First Minister are both on record as saying that they want free movement of people and of goods to continue. That I think is reflected in their letter to the Prime Minister of the 10th of August. The Secretary of State has said that several times that there's no intention to have a return to the borders of the past. The issue will be coming up with an arrangement which is satisfactory to the British government and the Irish government, and which is also obviously acceptable to the EU, and that's where the challenge really will come.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Deputy Chair, Danny.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Welcome. Thank you very much for your presentation thus far. A couple of points just arising out of, I suppose, the earlier question. The main political action, presumably then, where Northern Ireland is concerned, is at the Joint Ministerial Council plenaries. The great beasts of the political jungle sort of roar. For lesser mortals and for lesser beasts, then the civil service do their work through the JMC European negotiation. Is that it?
There's another JMC grouping being set up called JMC-O, O for officials. So that's a formal mechanism for officials to engage, but there is a lot more unofficial engagement going on between ourselves, various Whitehall departments, and indeed with our Scottish and Welsh colleagues as well.
And each department has their Brexit team as necessary, and that's coordinating through with their counterparts in UK or the rest of the UK, and the regional administrations as necessary as well.
Yep.
Okay. What in terms of, I think what appears to be emerging is that Prime Minister, even earlier today, is clear that United Kingdom government will take charge of the negotiations, and you know, so it seems to me that for Northern Ireland, as a regional involved administration, it's key that we have as direct input into the Prime Minister and the Cabinet as much as possible. So in terms of that, then the relationship
Things like
with the
you know, entertaining the governing party or what have you, speaking to them,
champagne reception.
things like that. Yeah, making friends and influencing people.
Well, I didn't know you were a champagne man, but anyway,
You should have some humble pie.
I think what's key, I think, what is more important, I think, than champagne is the detail to be worked out in the relationship, particularly with the Secretary of State. Now, explain to me what is currently in place, what mechanisms are currently in place with the Secretary of State and the Northern Ireland Office in terms of the work of this administration.
Well, even going to sort of higher pay grade, First Minister, Deputy First Minister have together met the Prime Minister, and I think there have been other meetings at senior level as well. There are very regular meetings between First Minister, Deputy First Minister and the Secretary of State, and there is very regular engagement between officials and NIO officials. And like Derek, Malcolm McKibben, Andrew McCormick and I are in fairly regular discussions with them, and we would have fairly regular discussions with NIO and Cabinet Office and Department for Exiting the EU officials as well. So there isn't a sort of straitjacketed formal mechanism. It's a combination of sort of formal mechanisms which I've described, but I think the more important engagement is the informal mechanism, the informal discussions which are taking place almost day and daily.
So it's an informal... Right, Derek.
Sorry to cut across you.
Yep.
No, I was just going to add a point, and maybe it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Further down the food chain, at my level, for example, one of the things that is really important is that we at official level are constantly, to use the vernacular, in the faces of our counterpart departments in Westminster on this. And I'll give you a for instance. We know that the Department for Exiting the European Union, which is coordinating this in Whitehall, has commissioned a lot of economic analysis broken down by business sector, just to see what do those sectors look like, what are their significance in terms of employment and output, trade, where's it going to, who are they trading with, what are the labour market statistics, where are the workers coming from. So they're doing that analysis ultimately to feed into the UK's negotiating position. Now we've got to be with them on that, we've got to get access to that, and we simultaneously are doing our own analysis in the Department for the Economy, using our own economists and statisticians, liaising very closely with InvestNI to get the qualitative stuff in from business sectors, so that we can make sure that that analysis done in Great Britain properly reflects any particular nuances which are relevant to Northern Ireland. Now we're getting that traction, you know, our colleagues in Westminster are very, very willing to engage with this and have been very open, but we need not to be passive in this, because as you well know, sometimes they can forget about it, so that's why we need to be in their faces, as I use that term. But we're getting no resistance in that regard, but that's the kind of thing we need to be doing at official level. And maybe just picking up a question on the Northern Ireland Office, the Northern Ireland Office obviously has an interest in this too in certain areas, but they are facilitating engagement between all the executive departments at official level and the Cabinet Office and the Department for Exiting the European Union, particularly on what might be deemed cross-border issues as well. Just getting a good feel and understanding of that, again, to make sure that all of our concerns and issues are fed into the Cabinet Office and the Department for Exiting the European Union, so that they have a full picture and a full understanding of all the issues that are important to us. So, it is a bit of a blunderbuss approach. There's lots of channels, but I think that's actually better than just channeling everything through one thing, you know, and we hope the message will stick, and we're confident it will. We are getting receptiveness.
Yeah, well, thank you. Through you, Chair, it seems to me that the key relationships in terms of Northern Ireland's interests being best represented not only by the regional administration, i.e. FMDF, and the executive, and to a lesser extent the Assembly, but certainly the executive and those at the head of the executive, but is surely the Northern Ireland Office and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who is supposed to represent the best interests, and that's his title, and I'm not suggesting that he's doing otherwise, but that his job is to represent the interests of Northern Ireland at Cabinet level. Now, in that, we're not going to be involved in the direct negotiations. The seat closest to the Prime Minister at Cabinet level has to be the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and it's so we need to harvest those those links and ensure that there is proper work and liaison with the Northern Ireland Office. And is that happening?
That is happening both at ministerial level and at official level.
But there are no formal structures, so that it's done at the moment.
There are. Well, I think there need to be particular formal structures for engagement between ourselves and the Northern Ireland Office. Yes. There is very regular engagement, but then the formal JMC type structures that I described, the Northern Ireland Office is very much a part of that.
Just to ask Paul, perhaps, to through you, Chair, to outline. He's heading up there a new unit to deal with these issues. What are the structures involved with that? What's the amount of personnel available to you, and what are their jobs and chief responsibilities?
Well, in essence, my unit has been established, if you like, to help coordinate and support the work that is going on in all of the departments. As David has outlined, the primary research, analysis, economic assessments are being done by the people who know those individual business areas. But I think it was recognised that there needed to be a sort of resource to bring that all together within the Executive Office to, if you like, start to prepare the sort of unified position to support ministers in those negotiations and in JMC, and that is the role, the primary role of my team at the moment, is to support this interdepartmental coordinating group and bring a central focus. Resources were quite small at the moment because we're only established a few weeks, but I think we're sufficient for that sort of coordination supportive role.
What does quite small mean?
3.
Right, okay. And that's you and 2 others?
That's me and 2 others,
okay.
Yeah.
But you expect that to be supplemented and added to?
As required.
Okay. As you require?
I think as the work would demand it, really.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. I asked the researcher earlier, mistaking his question for yourself, just with regard to the impact of the Good Friday Agreement, particularly around strand 2s and 3s and relationships that this vote will have or could potentially have across this island and across the islands. The other thing, just quickly as well, you did say that the direction you've been given is to look at the best possible outcomes for the North. Can I ask, just on the back of that, are you looking at arrangements that will have the North remaining within the EU? And is there any discussion taking place on the basis of that with, for example, Scotland? And then just lastly, this is going to have an impact on the citizens who live here, and most people seem to suggest that it's going to have a negative impact. What is the financial number in terms of EU funds or funds to the North put at risk because of this?
Well, picking up the first point, we weren't in the room, so I'm not sure what the researcher was saying in the constitutional position, and I don't think I would be qualified to comment on that anyway. Your second question, which was in and around what possible constitutional arrangements might we be recommending, I don't see that as our role. I think our role is very much to provide advice to ministers on the possible impacts and also the measures that might be taken to address or mitigate some of those. It'll be for ministers to decide what it is they wish to argue for whenever the negotiations begin. So the issue that you referred to there is very much a matter for political discussion. The third point then, just about EU funding. This has been a particular concern for all departments, and my minister has been campaigning very hard to make sure that there will be no loss of spending power, there will be no loss of funding. We are actually in a much better place today following the Chancellor's announcement in the last couple of days that the guarantee which he had given before is going to be extended from the autumn statement up to the point of exit. And our preliminary assessment, and I wouldn't want to be held to this, is that whereas last week we thought that our exposure or risk could have been as much as €1 billion, is now much reduced, and it may well be much less than €100 million now. So that has been a welcome reassurance in the last couple of days.
So in terms of that figure, over what period is that a figure that you're...
That's the programme funding that was at risk for those programmes that were running from 2014 to 2020. Isn't that the right answer?
And with the indulgence, Chair, I mean, there's obviously going to be a bigger impact in specific EU funded programme. We could talk about agriculture, we could talk about finance, we could talk about investment, we could talk about trade. At what point will officials be able to provide a figure of that kind of impact?
Well, the figures I was quoting were in relation to the amount of funds within those specific programmes. In my department, we have a particular concern for the Interreg and the Peace Fund, Peace Programme, and they are largely, the assurance covers all that we were expecting to draw down in the period between 2014 and 2020. I think if you're talking about the potential wider economic impact, that would be a matter for economists to forecast. We at the moment are not producing any forecasts about the impact, but certainly we are working very closely with the Economic Policy Centre in the Ulster University, and I know that Neil Gibson's, Professor Neil Gibson's centre, and they are looking at this. Now, they haven't reached any firm conclusions as yet, but I think generally, Neil's view would be that over time, things will sort of even themselves out.
Just to be clear, David, you were saying that because the initial statement from the Chancellor, I said you had to have it signed off by the autumn statement.
Yep.
That put €1 billion of projects in Northern Ireland at risk because there was a risk they would not be signed off in time.
That's correct.
And because of his statement at the Conservative Party conference in the last number of days, 900 million projects could now be secure.
I wouldn't want to be quoted on that completely because we're still.
Have you met Mr. Hansard?
No, I wouldn't want to be held to it, shall I say. We're still assessing just the impact of that. But our initial assessment is that the guarantee will cover projects which are going to be agreed beyond the 23rd of November, the date of the autumn statement, and that therefore it does provide reassurance which covers more or less all that programme spend up to 2020.
And
the challenge for us obviously still is to make sure that those projects that we expected to be successful and draw down funds before exit occurs, which is now likely to be early 2019, that we get those projects processed, letters of offer issued within that time frame. We've got more time to do it.
Yeah. So that's right. Yes, 100 million-ish, whatever it turns out to be, are these projects?
It could be less than that.
Yeah. These are projects that need more work rather than just process.
What may remain at risk isn't so much what's in those programmes. It's other programmes where it's not clear whether the guarantee extends to. We've quite a list of different programmes.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you and ask for written confirmation of that later on, but Sean.
Thanks, Chair. This may overlap somewhat, David. You
John,
said...
sorry, Cal did want to...
Chair, please, just
sorry,
some one quick point, and because My colleague asked a question there, David, to be honest, on the Good Friday Agreement, as part of that setting up, there was entitlements and obligations in relation to, at that time, being in Europe. And what we're saying is, I know you're speaking from an official capacity, but surely there has to be some work brought forward in relation to that, and those negotiations and those talks that were committed to at that time has to be brought forward as part of the workman, because there definitely was obligations there on entitlements in relation to that matter, and that's the key element of that question asked by my colleague.
Yeah, no, well, I'll take that point on board. At the moment, the remit of the work that we're doing is extending by and large to economic and social impacts. Those sort of constitutional issues we're not directly addressing at the moment, but I'm certainly happy to take that back.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And David, how much is the British government cooperating with ourselves, the Scottish and the Welsh, to look at issues and scope out options?
Relationships are amicable. I think Derek has hinted at the fact that we would have some frustration that the exchange of information is a little bit too one way at the moment, in that we are providing them with analysis of the impacts here, but we are not yet getting a free flow of information which shows their analysis of the impacts on the UK as a whole, and that is something we're pushing hard on.
So that's a gap.
There is a gap at the moment. Yeah, we are not.
And that's coming.
Yeah, although just to supplement that, and it's an observation, in the last few months, it probably has been extraordinary that our ministers here have been visited by 3 secretaries of state who are intimately involved in issues regarding EU exit, which shows a very high level of engagement at political level, which I think is very, very welcomed. And indeed, in some of those visits by secretaries of state, particularly the Secretary of State for International Trade and for exiting the European Union, but there was engagement with local business interests, so there was an opportunity for local business interests to relay their issues directly right to the top, where people will be engaged in negotiations.
Chair, thanks. You said you were feeding in the NI perspective. Could you elaborate on that, what that perspective is, David?
Well, market access is a particular issue. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, if, one of the things that, the Chair asked at the start, I think, of David, if we're reaching out to try and get views in, and one of the things that's happening within the Department for the Economy sort of firmament is that a couple of fora have been set up under the good auspices of Invest Northern Ireland, chaired by Alistair Hamilton, the Chief Executive, or jointly chaired by him and by Andrew McCormick, the Permanent Secretary, to gather views from business. So one of the fora involves leaders from a range of local businesses, quite a large number of businesses, cut and diced by sector, by size, by geographical area, and then a similar group for the business representative bodies like the CBI, Chamber of Commerce, Federation of Small Businesses, and so forth. And the purpose of those fora is to make sure that we get directly from business what their issues are as they get to grips with these issues, and indeed to feed back what we know and describe to them the various arrangements that are in place, and that provides some level of comfort to business. But to go back to the point there, it was through that kind of communication that the issue of, and Mr. Boylan made the point, labour mobility was raised. That actually is the number one issue for many of our businesses. You might think that market access would be number one, but it's access to skills and labour is a big issue for many of our businesses, particularly businesses located in Newry in the northwest. And there's a couple of very high-profile examples where people commute, and it was for that reason that was fed in to the executive and then manifested itself in the letter that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister wrote to the Prime Minister, and that's how that conduit of information is working. And
did you mention, I may have picked this up wrong, David, there was a border working group, did you say, or broader? Maybe I picked this up wrong.
No, there is. I think the NIO has set up a border issues working group, which certainly the Department of Justice are heavily engaged in.
Actually, all departments are engaged, all executive departments.
Yeah.
That all, you know, whilst there may be sort of vertical issues, if I can use that term, you know, be it trade, be it labour mobility, be it sectoral analysis, the border issues group is horizontal because the border kind of affects all of those. So all departments are represented on it. So it's to identify issues which, if you like, are peculiar to Northern Ireland in all of this, so that we can feed them back to the Cabinet Office and the Department for Exiting the European Union. And I have to say that the Cabinet Office and the Department in Whitehall for Exiting the European Union fully recognise that we are unique in this regard, and they do have to play those issues into the UK negotiating strategy.
And finally, I think it was yourself, David, said that there were examples of opportunities, and we had a Professor Finnemore here a couple of weeks ago, and I think somebody asked him at the end, and he said he couldn't think of any. Could you give an example of?
Well, clearly, one of the immediate impacts has been the fall in the value of sterling, which has provided a boost to exporters. There are also opportunities to maybe have a lighter touch approach to regulation. There will be potential opportunities to forge new trade arrangements with other parts of the world. There will be, I think, other opportunities. I say in the regulatory environment, you know, if we have a slightly lighter touch approach to state aid rules, you know, if InvestNI has more flexibility in how it provides support to promote and develop existing businesses and or attract new foreign direct investment, it's in that sort of area that there will be opportunities.
You're going to reduce standards?
Well, again, with any, if you're looking at any regulatory regime, whether it's to do with employment law or health and safety, you know, it'll be for politicians to decide on what is the right balance between creating opportunities for economic development as opposed to, for example, protecting the environment, protecting workers' rights, having a sort of a sensible approach to health and safety. You know, those are the sort of discussions, political decisions that are going to need to be taken.
Christopher.
David, that was tremendous. 5 minutes, roughly, of positives, and you're not even an academic. That was well done. I was delighted to hear it.
Don't be completely
in terms of the, calm down now, calm down.
I'll take a compliment. I don't get
Yes,
it.
take it when you get it. In terms of the getting up to speed, I think it's fair to say everybody, or almost everybody, including those of us who were on the Leave side in the campaign, did not see the outcome that we got coming in terms of the actual result. You mentioned earlier about getting up to speed with the implications of that. Are you satisfied now that we are up to speed and are punching at the same level as other devolved regions and even the London as well?
That's a hard judgment to call because there has been clearly huge upheaval in Whitehall. They've created 2 new departments from scratch. The Scots have clearly put in place a range of different arrangements. I think we're as well prepared as we can be in the circumstances. The test will come whenever we get down to a position where ministers are starting to, first of all, prepare their negotiating position, and then secondly, actually engage in negotiations with the EU. For the moment, as I say, Deloitte have done a piece of work where they have made an assessment of capacity and capability. That report is sort of more or less finalised now. So it has identified that we probably do need to do more to well, we need to find more expertise in sort of economic analysis. We were going to probably need some more lawyers as well, and we'll have to find those people.
You're satisfied that the department is well enough equipped that it will be able to access those people and find them?
Well, we will have to, obtain additional expertise.
Yes.
Whether that means recruiting more people or buying in expertise as is needed on specific circumstances, we haven't yet decided.
Right.
But like, for example, I'll give you one example where we've moved quickly to process a range of Interreg and peace programme projects. We've actually engaged a small number of additional economists on a short-term basis to help process those particular business cases, etc. So that's one example of where we have moved quickly to bring projects as quickly as possible to the point where they can be approved.
Okay. In terms of just the general direction from the top of the department, has there ever been an instance where FM and DFM have issued contradictory advice or requests to civil servants in regard to this issue? Or are they both pointing exactly in the same direction?
No, I'm very clearly under instructions that we are to work together to find to provide advice on what would be the best outcomes for Northern Ireland.
Okay. And just then, in terms of Mr. Kennedy raised a point, and I think it's a good point in terms of the Secretary of State and I'm trying to understand. I appreciate it can't be a formalised structure. How could it possibly be? But in terms of the level of engagement that there is between the Secretary of State, FM and DFM, and how that then will feed into preparing the United Kingdom's negotiating position. Because in one sense, we'll be negotiating with our government to have our, when I say our government, I mean the Whitehall, we'll be negotiating with Whitehall
It is now.
about our position as part of then the sort of formal Whitehall position that they then negotiate with other EU states on. Is that an accurate summation of where it's at? Or are we actually going to be participants in negotiations?
Well, how this is going to work isn't entirely clear as yet. The Prime Minister has said that she wants the UK's negotiating position to be an agreed negotiating position.
Yes.
Now, I think most people would recognise that's going to be quite a challenge given the difference of views between the devolved administrations and the UK government on some issues, but nonetheless, I think we're taking at face value that that is the intention at the moment. But how negotiations are actually conducted is not something that has been agreed, or certainly something that I'm not aware of as yet.
Is there going to be like a scoping exercise on that, or are you expecting to hear anything on that?
I'm not sure exactly what the process for getting to that point is, but certainly I think that type of issue is the sort of thing that would be discussed in the group that Malcolm is involved in with the other permanent secretaries and also at JMC. The JMC plenary meeting, which I mentioned, which is taking the 24th of October, I think is likely to be discussing these types of issues.
Fine. Thank you.
Stuart.
Yeah, Chair, I'm sure it wasn't a Freudian slip whenever Christopher said our government having sipped champagne with them during the week. I'm sure he considers himself to be part of
Still a member of the Liberal Democrats, Stuart?
their government.
You were in government with them too.
Okay, look, let's focus in here.
Gentlemen,
It's not the debating chamber, it's the committee.
When the Prime Minister said today that the authority of the EU in this country has ended forever, and she promised, and I quote, "the reintroduction of a border control is now a thick, immovable red line." Where do you see that thick, immovable red line, and what are the consequences for Northern Ireland? Will it be on the border between here and the Republic, or will it be somewhere in the middle of the Irish Sea?
Well, clearly I'm not the person that's going to determine what the future arrangements are going to be. All I'm doing with my colleagues across all departments is providing advice to ministers on whatever possible outcomes emerge and to give advice on how we might respond to those. So I haven't actually seen the Prime Minister's statement as of today.
Given that we don't have responsibility locally for customs or for international borders, what influence will our ministers' advisers have in respect of issues like this, and particularly given the Prime Minister's statement that she sees it as a thick red line? I think even you could, wearing your neutral hat, accept that that is a very strong statement in relation to the type of border we're going to have.
Well, she has also said, and indeed the Secretary of State has also said, that they do not want to introduce hard borders here. They do not want to return to the borders of the past.
Thick red line before.
Well, as I say, I haven't seen that statement. First Minister, Deputy First Minister have been given pretty firm assurances that they want to come up with solutions which will recognise the particular difficulties that occur in Ireland.
Can I turn to the issue of your relationship with your other colleagues around the United Kingdom and the devolved administrations? And particularly turning to Scotland, which clearly speaks with one very strong political voice in terms of how its public servants will be representing the Scottish Government. Given that you have perhaps two directions to be drawn in through OFM, DFM, how will you deal with that, and how will ultimately the government and the officials that you represent be able to square the circle of the differing demands that are placed on civil servants around the United Kingdom, those perhaps coming from Scotland, which might take a different view from here or from Westminster?
I don't feel I'm being pulled in two different directions. I think I said before, it's quite clear that the two parties came at the referendum from different perspectives. However, I've been very clear that since then, my priority is to provide advice on what is in the best interests of our people here. And nothing has happened that sort of conflicts with that. As to how ministers ultimately decide they're going to negotiate with the UK government, that will be for them to determine at a political level.
But nevertheless, the political input to Scottish civil servants will be different from that given to you and perhaps given to Westminster civil servants. The
Scottish context is very different from ours. Yeah, we play the ball as we find it.
The Deloitte report, which you said is coming to a conclusion at this stage for yourselves, will you be in a position to share that with us?
I'll check on that.
Take that away, please.
I'll take that away.
Yeah, that would be helpful to know, because you don't seem able to share much else with us. In relation to the expertise that you've inevitably suggested you will need to draw upon in Northern Ireland, I think you said legal and consultant-wise, where will Northern Ireland fit in the pecking order for this? Because I think it's well documented that the United Kingdom is poorly placed when it comes to those type of advisors, whether it's in relation to negotiating future agreements or indeed understanding the total implications of this. Surely those type of experts will wish to gravitate towards London and to be providing and selling their wares to the Westminster government rather than to people like us.
Well, we will obtain the advice that we need given our particular context. We're not clear yet how negotiations on future trade arrangements are going to be conducted, to what extent they're going to be needed, but we will respond as we see, as is appropriate at the time. I don't think I could be any more precise than that at the moment, because simply the terms of engagement haven't been agreed as yet.
But will we end up basically getting second-hand advice or recycled advice?
Certainly, it would not be the intention to end up with second-hand advice.
Thank you.
Chris, was this a follow-up?
It is, briefly. It's just, I think, just to be clear, at the British Irish Council on the 22nd of July, the Deputy First Minister said, "I'm for staying in Europe, but if the British government trigger Article 50, and are then involved in a negotiation to exit Europe as a responsible politician, have a duty and a responsibility to work with the First Minister and with other ministers in the executive to make the best fist of what we can in relation to defending the interests of the people who we represent. Has that been the approach of the Deputy First Minister? Is that how you would
As I said, I get a very, very clear set of instructions from both First Minister and Deputy First Minister.
No pulling in either direction.
I think the point's been made on a number of occasions, Richie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation.
Appreciate you making it.
As an MLA representing a rural constituency and a border constituency, I would have great concerns over the future of the North in a post-Brexit environment, from border controls to single farm payment, etc. How confident are you that the North of Ireland will get a fair deal? Or would you agree with me that we're so far down the pecking order that it's difficult to see what benefits there are from a Brexit?
I can't predict what the outcome is going to be. All I can do is repeat, I suppose, what I've said before, which is that we will provide the best possible advice to ministers going into discussions. First and Deputy First Minister have received assurances from the Prime Minister and indeed from the other ministers involved. The Secretary of State for International Trade, Secretary of State for exiting the EU, that Northern Ireland's unique position is understood. It'll be represented in the negotiations with Europe. I think it's probably fair to say that whilst the EU is perhaps a little hostile to the UK at the minute because of what has happened, nonetheless we have many friends in Europe because of the recognition of the unique circumstances that Northern Ireland faces. So whilst I can't predict the outcome, I wouldn't want to think that we will be going into these negotiations in anything other than a sort of positive way.
In terms of analysing the impact of Brexit would have here, since coming into the Assembly and I'm a new Assembly member, my party and I have asked on several occasions in terms of preparation work done on the implications of Brexit. And generally we got no opportunity to get any answers. But then last week we found out about this European Policy Unit report. Can I ask, and I think it might have been covered before, but just as clarification, who commissioned the report?
Well, again, I think the point I made earlier was the First Minister gave a very full answer on this in the Assembly. I think it was yesterday or the day before. There's not much more I can add to it. These were issues that occurred within the Executive Office, and I'm not privy to all the detail around that. So, but I think the point I made earlier is since the 23rd of June, there has been a very focused, concerted, coordinated effort to assess the impact, the potential impact of leaving the EU, and to provide the best possible advice to ministers going into the negotiations that are going to start presumably pretty soon.
Do you think the report that highlights 20 negative repercussions of Brexit on the North, should that have been shared with the public?
Well, again, that's not for me to comment upon, but certainly there has been no shortage of analysis of the potential impact of Brexit available, and indeed you referred to Professor Fenimore, who has produced a paper on this, so there is a wealth of analysis of the various issues.
And can you also say what ministers were given this report?
Again, I don't know.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. We have focused to date on what's happening in Belfast, how that is inputted to London, so London go and negotiate with Brussels. There's, of course, another route going round the back, or to use a golfing analogy, slipping on at the 10th. We have the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels. We have a Barroso task force in Brussels. And we have 3 MEPs we haven't even mentioned during the course of this discussion in Brussels. How do they fit into your thinking?
No, well, again, sorry, my omission, I should have mentioned them. Our office in Brussels is very important, very valuable in two respects. One, for providing us intelligence about what is happening there, what the mood in Brussels is, but also providing an opportunity to actually influence the key influencers in Brussels. So we will be using that. The Barroso Task Force, I don't think it's called that anymore, is it still? Just the Special Task Force. Again, there's an opportunity there to use that, and that will be taken wherever appropriate. So the Brussels dimension to this is not neglected, has not been neglected at all, and is a very much a part of what we're doing.
What about the MEPs?
And the MEPs as well, yeah. The MEPs will, like, one of the things that, one of the immediate impacts was that Commission officials have been instructed not to engage on discussions which may be related to future negotiating positions, etc. So we haven't had the same access that we maybe had before, but certainly MEPs, I think, are still in a position to get access to commissioners and to others. So, you know, they will be used and are being used where appropriate.
And in terms of the mood in Brussels, David, you're saying you recognise there's a degree of hostility to the UK.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment.
But also a fairly practical, hard-headed attitude. I mean, it seems to me that there was a shock, a bit of mourning, then everybody went off for their summer holidays, and it's come back to a certain extent saying, well, we're going to have to do this, so let's scope it out and get on with it.
Yes, you know, many people, you know, some members around the table have said it was surprising what happened in June. I think that's again very fair comment. And I think the surprise in Brussels was just the same. And you know, the reaction has perhaps been a little predictable, but I think you're right. I think as time goes by, those who are involved in negotiating on both sides will realise that actually there are a great many there's a huge range of interests here, and that is probably, more than probably, it is certainly in the interest of both Europe and the UK to reach a sensible deal at the end of this. You know, I think it's probably, again, fair comment. Europe needs a strong UK. The UK needs a strong Europe.
The Prime Minister's now given us a timeline. Do you have a timeline internally for when you will have scoped out the policy options, the priorities, and an assessment of whether those priorities clash or complement the UK government's priorities?
Well, the three key dates in the timeline at the moment would be the end of March, whenever Article 50, the latest date by which the Prime Minister has said Article 50 will be triggered. Before that, we have the JMC plenary meeting on the 24th of October, and we have an NSMC plenary meeting in November. So there will be other things, you know, put into that timeline, but at the moment our focus is very much on those key dates.
Just at the very beginning, you mentioned the three departments: economy, agriculture and environment, and justice, as the ones likely to be most impacted. What are the specific concerns with justice?
Well, justice, there would be issues in and around the common travel area. There'd be issues in and around movement of people, border, you know. On the one hand, if we, well, I don't want to speculate about possible outcomes, but clearly you'll understand that there are issues in and around just movement of people.
But is the European arrest warrant a specific issue?
The European arrest warrant would be one example of that.
So there would be potentially, in a good outcome scenario, a hiatus while we come out of Europe before we renegotiate.
I wouldn't want to speculate on what might emerge, and I'm not expert on justice issues, so that's why I'm sort of hesitant to offer any particular views on that. But What I would say is that justice officials are very heavily engaged in this, and through the Border Issues Working Group, all departments are also represented.
I'd like to close with a list of asks, if I may.
Sure.
I think it would be very useful to have an organogram, some sort of structure in terms of all these JMCs, and just for us to get our head around how that looks.
We can do that.
You talk about an audit of issues with Dublin. I request on behalf of the committee that you ask if we can have sight of that when it is compiled.
Yes, that is a matter for discussion at the NSMC plenary in November, and as always there will be a statement to the Assembly after any NSMC plenary.
We've already asked for the Deloitte report when it's complete, so you'll take that away. It would be also useful in terms of that £1 billion. Would it be possible to have a list of funding applications?
Yeah, we can give you. I think we provided a breakdown before of the funding position, and we will rework that post the Chancellor's latest announcement, and I'll talk to the Minister about how best we might sort of promulgate that.
Yeah, for my money, it'd be nice to have like a RAG indicator. Shows us what's really in danger and what you think is relatively safe. Anything else, members?
Sure, just 2 points. In terms of the office in Brussels and communication back and forward, I wouldn't mind a wee bit of an update on that there, what their interaction is in relation to any of the matters. You mentioned the MEPs there. What's going on there, if you can come back on. And I think also, Chair, I mean, the people who will know most about this here, and I appreciate, I was listening to Derek interestingly when he was talking about Whitehall officials and the discussions now that you have in there. I mean, no harm to anybody in the room, but the key discussions on how this land board that works, I think the 26 counties and negotiations with the Irish government is key, to be honest with you. We on this side know as much as anybody else besides, because everybody talks about the member state, which is going to be dealt with by Westminster, but I mean, I feel that those negotiations, and the Chair's already alluded to, kept in the loop of those discussions. I think there needs to be more than just the north-south ministerial statements back and forth. I'd like to hear more about as those discussions go forward. Be kept informed.
We can take that back. As far as life in Brussels, views in Brussels is concerned, certainly I think Andrew Elliott, who heads up the Brussels office, has appeared before this committee before and would be very happy to come back to this committee again to give an up-to-date assessment.
He'd actually be happy to host us out in Brussels.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay, Paul, Derek and David, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members, just to clarify that, Andrew Elliott, the head of the office in Brussels, would be very happy if we wanted to go out as a committee. Personally, I think we're always better to go with one rep per party. But that is for you as a committee to decide. It's also the question of timing. If do we want to ask him to come to us? Last time I think it was a video conference. Could we ask maybe staff to have a word with him and see if he thinks it's the right time, or whether give him another week, month, whatever. And then the other issue is the MEPs, whom we have not heard from. Is it time to invite the MEPs?
Yeah. Nothing else to do now.
And as we didn't get a paper ahead of this, we have nothing to circulate to the other statutories, but we could alert them to the Hansard if they were interested. Yeah? Okay. Correspondence then, members. Correspondence summary sheet starts at page 151. I want to refer you to the page 159, the correspondence, the Committee for Finance, providing a copy of correspondence from the Minister of Finance, advising of his intention to produce a one-stage budget in December or early January to cover financial year 17-18 for Resource DEL, but he's going to do a multi-year capital DEL. Our Executive Office officials are scheduled to brief us on Wednesday, the 19th of October. Apart from that then, in terms of the draft forward work programme, there's that additional meeting next Tuesday the 11th, Mark Friedman and others from the Global Outcomes-Based Accountability Summit. We are seeing them at 6 in session, and then we are hosting the reception that closes that summit at 7 upstairs in room 115. If you have not already done so, could you please advise staff of your availability? Sean?
In terms of the forward work programme, Chair, I know something that has been coming up all the time is this about the Single Equality Act. And we have had a number of reports where criticism of here, you and I were at the CEDA report, the Equality Commission, the Human Rights Commission saying it doesn't apply here, we lack legislation, etc., etc. There's a gap between here and the rest of these islands. Is to put it on the forward work programme in terms.
Yeah, but so remember, we're having the likes of the Human Rights Commission and the Equality Commission in to talk to us. So I think, in fairness, we should really hear from them, and then more than happy that you make a proposal in terms of next steps, and if that is
No, it's just sure. I thought we had it on our forward work the day we went away. Our priority day, did we not put it on the programme?
We discussed it. Well, I think what we agreed was the next step was to invite these bodies in. And I would expect after that you will propose that we do an inquiry or whatever you think is the next step towards that.
Thank you, Chair.
If you're happy enough.
And they're coming soon, aren't they?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. What else have we got? Oh yes, members, there is a news release with regard to hosting this reception to close the Outcome-Based Accountability Summit. That is in your table pack at page 11. We really need to agree that now, or with the amendments if you have any. Table, page 11. It's relatively uncontroversial.
Agreed.
Okay.
I think we're content. Okay. Anything else with regard to the draft forward work programme? Otherwise, then it is agreed. Any other business?
Just one item.
Stuart.
Chair, at a previous meeting it was reported to us that the OFMDFM had held up a UK government process in respect of the United Nations Committee on the Economy, Social and Cultural Rights by being absent from that meeting. I have written to the OFMDFM on 2 occasions now, first to ask a question, second to ask a question, why my question has not been answered. Can the committee give me any assistance in pressing to get an answer to the question?
I think that's one for the session on the 16th, Stuart, and I'm sure they will be making the point that sometimes, for political reasons, nobody is sent to these, or no report is issued because there's no agreement between the 2 sides of the Executive Office. And I think the arm's length bodies will make the point that if you don't go and explain that, then that's confused for people not caring.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily the case.
No, it's perfectly reasonable for us to suggest that we haven't got a consensus view on a particular issue, but that should have been reported.
Yes.
It comes back when one reads the minute or reads the reference that comes back to us as not being represented. That's very different from having a reasoned explanation as to why we had to say something, although it is nevertheless unacceptable that a conclusion had not been reached, given that this was an international agreement and the embarrassment was the United Kingdom government.
Yeah, but as you wrote as a MLA rather than a committee member, I think I have to ask you to bring it back once it's on our end on the 16th.
Thank you.
Any other business? And we adjourned Tuesday the 11th at 6 p.m. here in room 30.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.